Hi, good morning. Afraid this is a slight change of topic from what you've been hearing about over the last day. I'm going to talk about recent South African developments in relation to bilateral investment treaties, which is obviously the area in which I practice, as well as in resources, and focusing both on the termination of South Africa's bilateral investment treaties with the European Union member states, and the Promotion and Protection of Investment Bill, which is currently before Parliament and undergoing parliamentary hearings, in fact, this week and next week, and I'm actually involved in them. So this presentation is actually quite well timed. So what are bilateral investment treaties? Just to explain that very briefly, they're an international treaty between two states which guarantees certain standards of treatment for the nationals of one state in the other state. And what's very unusual about these BITs, as we call them, is that they constitute an agreement between two states which protects the investors of that state. In other words, the agreements between the two countries, but the investors of the one country are given rights in the investing state under that treaty. So they, as has been said in some of the literature, they really constitute an agreement without privity of contract, if you want to look at it that way. And what drove these BITs in the 20th century was the desire by capital importing nations like developing countries to protect the investments of capital exporting nations. BITs are really quite technical, and I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in relation to this in the interest of time, but what they cover are things like the admission of investments in a country, the notion of fair and equitable treatment, which basically means that the investments need to be treated properly, that the state basically guarantees a lack of change in the regulatory regime in a particular country, non-discrimination, which is an extremely important point, which basically means you have to treat foreign investors in the same way that you treat domestic investors, full protection and security, very importantly, protection from expropriation, and the requirement that when there is an expropriation of investment, full market value compensation is paid, free repatriation of returns by investors, and finally, and very importantly, investor-state dispute settlement. What that means is that if it is a dispute between the investor and the host state, the investor has the right to take the host state to international arbitration over that dispute. And that is, and I'll come back to that in a moment when I talk about the bill, that's extremely important. So just to give you some background, and you can look at this in more detail in the presentation, in the earlier period, say before 1964, this is the area of infancy, where there were very few international investment agreements. There were no investor-state dispute settlement cases in international arbitration. After 1965, this position changes. There are now a large number of international investment agreements, and most importantly, the establishment of the International Convention for the Settlement of Investment Disputes by the World Bank in Washington, and the signing of the Washington Convention in 1965. Regrettably, South Africa didn't sign up to this. Don't forget, this was in the dark days of apartheid, and I don't think it would have been welcome anyway. But the fact is that that has remained the key body for investor-state dispute settlement. So 1989 is obviously a very significant date because that's the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, which implodes 2 years later. So from 1990 to 2007, what I would call the area of the Washington Consensus, bilateral investment treaties, also known as international investment agreements, explode in number. So there are now 2,663.